So as the title says, it's been officially 5 years since Animal Crossing New Horizons was released on the Switch. It was definitely a crazy time in the world. Thanks to the pandemic, literally everyone was trapped indoors, and we needed something to do. So the newest Animal Crossing being released was exactly what the doctor ordered. Well, aside from, a cure for COVID. I remember at the time just how huge the game was. Practically everyone was either playing it or talking about it. To be fair, it was a great way to play online together with friends. And I remember going on Discord to try to trade or sell stuff in-game, all to make the perfect island. I even saw a lot of videos of people showcasing their islands too. To this day, one of my favorites is an island designed off a cruise ship. But 5 years later, it seems like nobody's really playing anymore despite how huge it used to be. So what happened? How did the game go from something that almost everyone and their mother knew about to almost abandoned nowadays? Today, I'm going to be looking back at New Horizons to see what worked and what didn't, especially in comparison to the other games in the franchise. Except for that, we don't talk about that. And with the Switch 2 announced for later this year, if and when Nintendo decides to release a new Animal Crossing game, they can hopefully use elements from across the series to make the perfect entry. So to start off, I know I did already mention some of the fun stuff New Horizons had to offer, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. Sure, I did have issues with the game, but I want to make it very clear that in no way do I think it's terrible. It had many great features, a lot of which I would even like to see return in the next game in the series. So the biggest feature was absolutely how much you could customize your island. Furniture had always been a big part of Animal Crossing, but you'd never been able to really place it outside until now. And it really feels so natural. Like a piece of the puzzle that was missing for so long was finally put in place where it belongs. Even in the older games, there was plenty of furniture that felt like it would be perfect to place outside. But alas, we were limited to only using them inside. New Leaf did eventually allow you to build things in your town to give it a more unique atmosphere, and while that was definitely an innovative improvement, and technically you could still decorate in other ways like what Ica Village did, it still didn't feel as complete as the system in New Horizons. That even had furniture similar to some of the building projects you could get in New Leaf, so you could even place them indoors if you really wanted to. I do have to give credit to Happy Home Designer on the 3DS for starting this, but for that you weren't really decorating a whole town, just a villager-specific space, so New Horizons decided to take the idea even further, and it worked. Now while New Leaf did introduce this feature for furniture too, I was also really happy to see they could still be customized this time around, with different colors or custom designs. And it wasn't even just furniture that gave players creativity either. In previous games, once you started a new game, it was a total roll of the dice on what your town would look like. While you still start out with a set layout for your New Horizons island, if you're not happy with it, you won't be stuck with it forever. It does take a little while, but eventually you'll get access to terraforming, which lets you change the island's landscape itself. Whether you want to create new cliffs, rivers, lakes, you name it, there's so many options. This all led to some very awesome looking islands. My personal favorite to this day is still the island designed after a cruise ship that I mentioned earlier, but there are several others out there that look amazing too. I remember how much fun it was during the game's heyday to explore other people's islands both online and via the Dream Island feature they added. For the final update, Nintendo gave the offer of paid DLC in the game. Now, in a lot of cases, paid DLC can be pretty crappy. Looking at you, EA.
These days it's not about collecting cans of creamed corn and childish platforming. Now it's all DLC and microtransactions and you.
But New Horizons actually handled it really well. We got the Happy Home Paradise expansion, and while there were a few things that didn't carry over from Happy Home Designer on the 3DS, overall it was very close. Plus, with the original 3DS version in mind, New Horizons basically added a new game onto it. While I bought the pack and personally really enjoyed it, I do understand if it might not be for everyone, but you don't have to worry about the items being exclusively locked behind the DLC, since there are still ways to get them. The only thing that you really can't do without the expansion in the main game is a few interior design add-ons or editing villager homes, but that really feels like a no-brainer anyways. So while the next game in the series, and any video game in general really, should be careful about how they handle paid DLC, Overall, making said DLC essentially an extra game to be added on to the original really isn't a bad way to go. When you would start a new game for previous entries in the series, you would have to answer a set of questions to determine your appearance, which you would then never be able to change. When I first got my 3DS and New Leaf with it, that was absolutely the game I was most excited to play, but admittedly I wasn't too thrilled when I saw my character looked kinda weird. That didn't stop New Leaf from being an amazing game, but man was I glad once I was finally able to get a Mii mask. I absolutely love how New Horizons ditched that entirely and let you fully customize your character to make it look the most like you, and with a Halloween update, you could even add unique skin tones to match costumes. I remember quite a few people had green skin for Shrek costumes, me included. That was a huge improvement from how the series handled your character's appearance in all the other games. Heck, in New Leaf, you had to stay out in the sun to darken your skin via tan, or else you were stuck looking as white as the Pillsbury Doughboy. Finally, at the end of the day, it still doesn't feel too different from the traditional Animal Crossing formula. A lot of new stuff was introduced this time around, like what I mentioned earlier, and the whole idea of starting a town from an empty wilderness to the town of your dreams was really innovative. When you compare the island to when you first arrived and started out with everyone intense to fully decorated and terraformed the way you desire, it gets even more impressive. In every previous game to date, when you first arrived in town, it was pre-built already. Sure, New Leaf gave you the option to place your houses and public works projects where you wanted, but all the other stuff had probably been there long before you ever arrived. So by building the desert island from the ground up, it truly does feel like it's yours. And yet, even with all that power, it's still not just a glorified city creator game. You still get to shop around, catch fish and bugs, talk to the animals, and many of the other things Animal Crossing is known for. Overall, plenty of what makes an Animal Crossing game is still present, the new features didn't get in the way of that, and the game was still able to keep a lot of the core aspects that both returning fans and new fans love. Now of course, as I stated before, having flaws doesn't automatically make a game bad or even unplayable. I still enjoyed the game at the end of the day, but I will admit that the flaws did hold it back from being my favorite Animal Crossing game. The biggest issue I personally had, and I know many others will agree with me on this, was the personalities for villagers, or rather lack thereof. Now many people have specifically been upset with how the villagers are too nice, and to be fair, as a longtime fan myself, it was definitely surprising to see. My very first game in the series was Wild World, and I remember how a lot of the animals were definitely tsunderes. Now, I know one reason this was likely changed for New Horizons is because Nintendo probably doesn't want kids getting upset at a game where the characters they're supposed to befriend just say mean things to them. Admittedly, when I was a kid with Wild World, this didn't really affect me as much, but I can still kinda see Nintendo's point. That being said, I still kinda miss how the villagers started out more skeptical of the player before growing friendlier towards them as they got to know them. I'm not saying make the villagers completely unlikable towards the player when they first meet them, but I think they should at least have it to where the villagers aren't quite as open. But once they trust you more, they start to express themselves more deeply, especially since that's how a lot of friendships in the real world work too. Of course, the villagers being too nice wasn't their only issue, but it did definitely contribute to them feeling soulless. While they did admittedly do stuff around town that I actually really enjoyed, like reading or stretching, that only really gave them a sense of personality on the outside. But when you actually talk to the villagers, you're gonna quickly realize that they're often only just repeating the same stuff. As a personal example, I remember I once had two villagers who had the same personality type, and their dialogue was usually pretty identical despite being different characters. Since each town can have 10 villagers and there's only 8 personality types, this is almost guaranteed to show up for players too. And even if they do manage to have different personality types scattered across the island, that still won't stop them from giving dialogue that is either the same or pretty close anyways. So when you put it like that, the villagers have all become less characters you can actually become friends with, and more so glorified pieces of decoration. Almost like statues to make your island look pretty. This next issue isn't just a problem with New Horizons, to be fair. Nintendo's sadly done this with many of their games on the Switch. When the game first came out during the pandemic lockdown, of course everyone was eager to play it to have something fun to do. Even me as a longtime fan still had fun with it, but I was still able to tell pretty quickly there was a lot missing from the previous games, whether it was some of the special characters, stores, or items. So to fix that, Nintendo started doing drip feed content updates for the game, where they would slowly add more stuff as time went on. Admittedly, we did get some pretty nice stuff thanks to these updates compared to a game like Nintendo Switch Sports, where it released bare bones and barely improved even after the new updates added a few other sports. Seriously, compared to the original Wii Sports games, would you really want to play Switch Sports over these? Yeah, didn't think so. But I digress. Despite all the updates we got, people understandably were annoyed it took a while for everything to be added to the game. And many fans were constantly waiting for updates when a large number of them felt like this stuff should have been in the game from the start. Along with that, everyone thought Nintendo was going to be doing these updates for at least 2 years, but instead they only did it for 1. There were literally more updates for their mobile game, Animal Crossing Pocket Camp, and that had much longer support compared to a full game on the Switch. Again, they added some awesome stuff, but even with all that, it still felt like there was a lot missing. I remember in New Leaf they gave that huge amiibo update, and that also introduced some new villagers, mainly some based on Zelda and Splatoon characters. I know New Horizons got Mario-themed furniture eventually, but the game received absolutely nothing for Zelda or Splatoon despite how much awesome stuff it had in New Leaf. In fact, they even could have taken the opportunity to add things from other games too, like Pokemon or Kirby. I guess I shouldn't be too surprised Zelda was ignored, since not too long after, Nintendo practically did nothing for their 35th anniversary. And to think my fellow Persona fans were upset by their 25th anniversary of the series. Try being a Zelda fan too. But it wasn't just a lack of promotional events either. I mentioned earlier how the lack of stores and special characters was especially upsetting after how we were drip-fed content, and we all thought we were getting at least another year worth of updates for good reason. To this day, I know Animal Crossing City Folk is one of the more underrated games of the series, but surprisingly, it's actually one of my favorites. While yes, it is essentially an expansion for Wild World brought to the Wii, much like how Persona 4 was enhanced with Golden and Persona 5 was enhanced with Royal, City Folk gave fans a lot more fun features too. As the name implies, players could visit the city, and not only did it have a nice atmosphere in general, but it also gave us access to far more shops than ever before. The idea clearly worked too, since they used the idea of the city to create Main Street in New Leaf. While it didn't quite fit the vibe of the city, it was still overall a really awesome place, and it gave you even more options for stores. But come New Horizons, we barely got anything. Sure, we did eventually get some shops on Harv's Island, but they're far less interactive than they were in New Leaf. Instead of a full-on building, they just have RV trailers that don't even show what's in stock for the day. Even though we did get a store from Reese and Cyrus there, in New Leaf their store didn't just furniture items. They even let you sell furniture between either players similar to the auction house from City Folk, and even villagers could buy and sell furniture too. I get Harv's Island was a convenient place to put the stores, but with how the player can travel to other islands, like Mystery Islands, they seriously couldn't have done something to bring back the city? The airport could have taken you there, or maybe you could take a boat to a new boardwalk area with indoor shops or something. And the worst part about the shops is by far the Nook shop. This is literally the only game in the series where you can only upgrade it once. When you compare all the remodels it can have in all the other games, with multiple floors might I add, then yeah, it's no wonder it's so underwhelming here. I also mentioned the lack of some of the special characters from previous games too, and to be fair, removing a lot of the locations can contribute a lot to that too. In previous Animal Crossing games, there would be some form of post office. It might not always be in the town hall, but it would exist, with either the friendly Pelly or the moody Phyllis there to help. Not surprisingly, Phyllis wasn't too thrilled about helping, but it did lead to some funny dialogue. In New Horizons, the post office was replaced with a stand at the airport. How basic can you get? Technically, both Phyllis and Pelly did come back, but you could only interact with them at the Roost, which feels more like cheap fan service than anything. Pretty much all the special characters that wouldn't usually be seen in the game were treated this way. Another example is Gracie. In City Folk and New Leaf, her stores had really expensive stuff, but they were still considered stylish and collectible. In New Horizons, it just looks like she went out of business and drowns her sorrows at the Roost to cope. Yes, I know many special characters did still return with a role, some actually gave some good activities too. but overall, most were lacking compared to previous titles. As an example, Wisp's Roll wasn't as fun in New Horizons either, especially since the rewards he gave you weren't usually worth it either, compared to how he could bring people to Harv's campsite. And for Harv himself, as cool as his photo studio was, he really should have had his campsite returned from New Leaf behind the studio instead of his shopping area. I really wish Cap'n could still bring you to the island he shared with Tortimer, since there's practically no minigames at all in New Horizons, and all the ones from New Leaf would have continued to be a lot of fun, especially thanks to how online multiplayer was handled there, and New Horizons has local multiplayer that can be added to it. But ultimately, it was left underused. So the sad reality is that these special characters are all shells of their former selves, with their downgraded roles. Finally, DIY recipes were originally introduced in Animal Crossing Pocket Camp, and to go back on that previous issue, Pocket Camp was a good game and all too, but I will say it is pretty frustrating that the mobile game had longer support and more updates than New Horizons, a mainline game. Anyways, back to my main point. I don't have a problem with being able to craft stuff like tools or furniture. When done right, that is. While a good start, the crafting system was still ultimately flawed in New Horizons for a few different reasons. The biggest pet peeve I had with DIY recipes is how tools broke, when they never had before in any other game. You had no way to really tell when they would break either, since there was nothing that would indicate how many more uses you could get out of them before the inevitable. And the worst part is that this happened with every type of tool. In previous games, the gold tools were meant to be rare and collectible, granting you some nice perks sometimes too. But in New Horizons, all they really have is more durability compared to the other tools. Like, I get if maybe the most basic flimsy tools broke, and while I don't think the normal version should break either, it would still make more sense than the golden tools breaking. With that in mind, there's barely any point to wasting your rare gold to create them, and even with regular tools, I can't really think of anyone who would say it's fun to have to constantly rebuild them all the time. Another problem that ties in with tools constantly breaking, say you want to build multiple tools so you don't have to worry about it as much later. Well, tough luck, but bulk crafting isn't possible. Instead, you have to craft everything one at a time, even if you're building multiple of the exact same item. That doesn't exactly sound fun either. But even with the stuff that won't break, like furniture, it still has flaws too. Again, done right, I think it could be a good system, but you'd need to fix the problems first. It can be really hard to find some recipes sometimes, and that's because the game has a real problem with giving you repeat recipes a lot. I know I've gotten the same recipes at least twice in a day multiple times when I've played, and I had to keep all the duplicates stored away in hopes I can find someone online who might want them instead. But you really shouldn't have to go online just to try to trade recipes you might need, especially since that's not always guaranteed. And some people don't even have access to the internet on their Switches anyway. So for the next title, if they want to do crafting again, then they have to make sure the recipes you don't have are more frequent to appear compared to the ones you do. Also, as a personal preference, since the materials can sometimes be hard or even tedious to get, I also wouldn't mind seeing a system where you can buy the necessary materials too. Overall, New Horizons did have plenty going for it, but it still wasn't a perfect Animal Crossing game. But at the same time, by taking what it did right along with what other games did right while abandoning the bad parts, that seems like a great track to take for making potentially the best game in the series yet. Of course, I know many of the things I've mentioned were things I've also seen other fans discuss as well, but some of my more personal opinions might not have been as widely talked about yet. So I'm also curious to see what everyone else thinks, whether about what I mentioned in the video itself, but also feel free to mention other things you'd personally like to see added or removed for the next entry. In the off chance that maybe Nintendo does see this video, maybe they'll take all our feedback into account. Plus, as I mentioned earlier, I enjoyed seeing the creative islands people made in the game, so I'm also down to see creative ideas. Have fun!